Thanks to the whole culture section from Cornell, which you was sending yesterday. Just for sometimes. Farming systems. Research and science is focused on developing testing sustainable practices that conservation of natural resources and biodiversity soil ecosystems. She understands how crop systems affect management affects crop and soil ecosystems. Anyway, so I was as an agriculturist background, so that was quite informative, and so I'm excited to just going to bring to us here today. So thank you for please welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry. See that works. It doesn't. It will. Okay. All right. So I live and work in California, so the results I will show you today are in Florida. I will work in the I need to introduce the concept of soil health, how we think about it in the setting, and introduce you to a practice that is turning out to be extremely beneficial to soil health, which is sheep grazing vineyards. And thinking of the next step of diversification from cover crop to getting again, keeping in mind that we came from that context here. And Justine practice and soil health in the region. Okay. Right. So first, soils are one of the most biodiverse ecosystem on Earth. They are extremely complex. They are extremely heterogeneous. With variability from a small aggregate to a century. So it's recognizing that it's very complex matrix. That is a very close relationship with the roots. And that we have an amazing amount of biological life that makes cycling of nutrients, flow through, and then influence so the productivity outcome of these systems. So This is going to be a thing. Okay, so what is soil health? It's defined by MCS of the continued capacity of soil to function as a living ecosystem that sustains plant and things. So that's the very explore conceptually how thinking that soil health is recognizing that soils are actually real. And so the way I think about soil health is that the soil health outcome in California in systems are completely different to the soil health outcome potential here. Soil health, our house is defined by our genetics, so it's going to be our genetics. To some extent, soil health is defined by the materials, so without the rock, that students from the soils, the kind of soil type that is present, and the management which is think about cover cropping, diversification, disturbances, tillage, etc. So it's an interaction, and the house potential is an interactions between those three different categories. Now, as an ecologist, I think about soil quite a different way than from a soil property, soil quality framework. I think about soil and soil health properties as a soil physical habitat. So when we think about the density, compaction, pore space, connectivities of pores, structure, aggregation, this is providing a physical habitat for the soil microbial, the soil organisms and the soil ecosystem as a whole. And then we have the resources coming in, this carbon, this nitrogen, the water, all this are energy and nutrients to fuel soil organisms that are often defined as through abundance, diversity, and interactions between them. So we have a soil ecosystem that is really defined by the physical habitat, the resources that come in, and the soil organism, who they are and what their function and how much they're active. So really an ecosystem. And so when we think about soil health and soil health indicators, we're really trying to see what's the habitat we're providing for our organisms and our crops, how many resources are available in time and space, and how much how vibrant and organized is this soil community. Now, we often think about soils as indicators. What are the goals is to define really what are the function a soil should achieve. So a healthy soil should accumulate and store carbon. That's the energy for your soil to be well functioning. That's the building structure of an aggregate and a good soil structure. It should provide and cycle nutrients. A healthy soil should conserve and cycle water. It should have good structure, improve soil structure, and support a diverse and active soil community, and eventually support productivity. It's still, we're in a business here. And so here at Cornell, you're very lucky. You have a comprehensive assessment of soil health. Looking at this from California, we do not have this. I actually send my samples to Cornell. So you're very lucky to have these resources around. And there's all the various frameworks that have been developed by the Soil Health Institute or by private companies, such as Solvita, for instance, to develop a set of parameters about how we should characterize our soil health. And they're often in various buckets: the physical properties, the chemical properties, the biological properties, and this list is definitely non-exhaustive. Some of my colleagues are burying underwear and looking at the speed of those underwear decomposition as an indicator of how healthy is your soil and how alive it is. So you can get really creative with the type of indicators that you use. And this data is used by growers to inform their management, to see where you are on this spectrum of soil health, see how healthy can you get compared to others. But it also used by us academics to kind of better understand relationships between different soil health properties. For instance, here you see the relationship between organic carbon and water availability. And so we know, since that's a graph from Hudson 1994, that as you increase soil carbon, you increase plant water available and water holding capacity. And so we actually use all of this data that we're collecting across vineyards and different cropping systems to develop better relationships between indicators and try to better understand some of the outcomes that you might get from storing more carbon and inform models. So these data is valuable to you. It's also valuable to us as academics to advance our science. So what are the principles of soil health building? This is not the regular principles that you will see within RCS. That's kind of my own take on it. What's very important is to lower disturbance. So that's tillage and trying to disturb as less as possible your soils and your aggregates and your microbial community. You want to maximize soil cover, so having a cover of the soil at all time, whether it's a mulch or whether it's a living soil cover, and you maximize the amount of time with living roots as well. And think about having diverse and frequent input of organic matters, and that can come from compost, for instance, or from sheep manure, that I will show you in a minute. And then you want to maximize biodiversity. There is a relationship that is emerging in the literature between above ground biodiversity and soil health. So the more biodiversity and the more stacking of those principles you will have, the healthier you might reach a healthier soil health state. Some of the practices that are instrumental into that falls into various of those principles that we've been experimenting with in California is the use of compost, the use of cover crops, and the use of no-till. And so scientists have been looking at which of those different indicators respond to different practices and to what extent. So I won't go really in depth over this, but basically green is good. You have an indicator of improvement. And yellowish is a reduction. And so there's various indicators respond at different time frame and to a different magnitude. And the Soil Health Institute has really come up with 3 indicators based on a data set from 124 long-term trials of 3 indicators that they think are good linked to function, that are responsive to management, and that are applicable at scale. Those 3 indicators are aggregate stability, organic carbon, and potential carbon mineralized in 24 hours that give you an indicator of nutrient cycling. So we're coming up with that type of data that helps you hone in on main indicators of soil health. In California, we've developed the North Coast Soil Hub that is aimed at providing a platform for growers to engage with soil health and way to measure it and have access to technical services and education services to implement soil health practices. And from this effort, we now have a soil health database, and this is the kind of report that a grower would receive based on his or her sample submission. So we'd have the 3 primary indicators that I just laid out: total carbon, aggregate stability, and mineralized carbon, and it makes some kind of like a needle as to where you are compared to the rest of the data set. And so that gives you an idea about some of the practices you might want to think about to improve different part of your soil ecosystems. And we'll also give secondary indicators here, and so you can see on the frequency distribution chart where your vineyard and your specific soil might be located, and then it comes with some advice as to how to build up soil health. Now, something that we've been interested in this space is to try to push the boundaries a little bit of soil health practices and think about livestock reintegration into cropping systems. We are fortunate to be able to do that a little bit more easily in California because first we have 400 crops to play with. So we have a lot of models to develop sheep grazing in vineyards. We've been doing it in orchards. We've been doing it in annual crop systems. We have definitely expanding perennials and vineyard systems. We also have a lot of animals in our landscapes that are very decoupled. So an opportunity to recouple animal production with forage and feed production and specialty crop into a better feedback loop here. And we're in a Mediterranean climate, so we can graze during the winter. We do not have a snow cover or a very low precipitation, well, except this year where I still haven't grazed my sheep. Cover crops look pretty dire. But in general, we graze during dormancy, so before bed break, so less of a concern in competitive grazing that you might have around here. And so sheep grazing in vineyard is interesting. I learned about it in New Zealand, where there's 24 million sheep and 4 million people. And that's how they farm. It's hard to find a vineyard in the Marble region that wouldn't have a sheep grazing there. And so I went there to learn and kind of understand how we could apply this practice in California, and really integrating an animal system for a circular, almost semicircular flow of energy and nutrients, and a better use of the service that a sheep might provide in a system for wine production. So what happened when you have an animal in there in terms of bringing back to soil health? Well, you completely change the amount and quality of residue that comes in. So you're going to have manure and urine that is very labile. You're going to have a shift in your plant community. It will go often toward more long-rooted species, more perennial species as you graze. Cereals, plants and animals have co-evolved for millions of years. They know how to grow with each other. It also, when you graze a plant, you have better allocation, you have a larger allocation of resources below ground, and more deposition of carbon at around the roots as well. So very drastic shifts in how a soil might be functioning. And so we've been interested in understanding improvements in soil health. Can this help store carbon, which is really a building block of soil health, and more broadly thinking of the sustainability outcome for the industry, how to implement it, and what are the real barriers to adoption. I want to introduce you to JD and Val Irwin, our shepherds. This is so our grazer, as Montana organic vineyards. You can see the sheep grazing. So we're not talking of a small scale practice here. We're talking about shepherds that have an app to be able to get your sheep for service, and that will not come if you have less than 400 acres to graze. So it's a practice that is really taking off. We actually don't have enough sheep to go around right now, the Napa Valley. I want to show you a little bit of this video that is giving you a little bit more flavor about what can be the potential benefits. Hopefully it all works out. It's about 3 minutes. And it's put together by Fibershed, who is really trying to value real products.
We all learned in the past 15, 20 years that nature already knew how to do it, and every time we've gotten involved, we've messed it up. So moving back to patterns and systems and orders of nature is incredibly sustainable, and it's incredibly efficient.
The way we're producing food and meat in particular today is unsustainable and is leading to a lot of greenhouse gas emissions.
By using livestock and bringing back different grasses and different species, it's going to change the way we farm.
An integrated crop livestock system is an agricultural system that actively integrates a livestock component and a crop production component.
I think when we have this conveyor belt system of this production, we tend to focus on a few traits of trees or animals, and therefore we forget that there's a complexity and the beauty of a diversity that actually creates the resiliency in a system.
Biodiversity is our secret weapon. We can't do it without it. It's using biodiversity to provide services that are now being provided by external inputs, offsetting those inputs using living organisms.
My name is Jamie Irwin, and my husband Robert Irwin and I run Chaos Sheep Outfit. I am a first-generation rancher. My husband is a third-generation rancher. The reason we're a good mix is I kind of bring fresh eyes on the scene, and he has a generational knowledge that is really, really important for successful livestock operation.
So sheep are going to be mowing through these vineyards, grazing grass. Once it's harvested, they're going to clean up all the extra fruit so that the diseases won't be there to go into the host into the following year. And then they're going to clean up all the summer broadleafs and annuals that have sprouted in the vineyard throughout the summer. In the winter time, they're going to take the nutrient cycle and they're going to move the nutrients throughout the entire vineyard. So they're going to spread all the grass that was here through their stomachs, spread it out through the entire vineyard.
The benefit that we provide for landowners and land managers is bringing down their costs for mowing and managing their land as well.
Sheep are able to put on up to a half a pound, sometimes more than half a pound a day while eating grass, and then the manure that they drop out the back still has 90% of the nutrients that they took up from the start.
Grasses are meant to be chewed on by a ruminant animal. You end up getting more seed production with a ruminant animal grazing.
Biodynamic orchards and vineyards need to have the animal component because they take away from the pesticides and the mowing that they would otherwise have to use.
We're affecting thousands of acres very quickly. One landowner can have 2,000 acres, which is a small ranch in California, and by changing just a little bit of way he thinks about how he manages that property, it affects drastically 2,000 acres. So that's carbon sequestration on 2,000 acres like that.
Well, this is a win-win for both the producer of the crop and the producer of the sheep. I think the biggest winner of everybody is the land and the animals.
So, so you've seen a little bit more about this practice. How is it done? Really, we rely on contractor for grazing. We mostly graze during the winter dormancy, and we use high density, short duration rotational grazing. And we've been working actively on designing specific cover crop mixes that can help with supporting those dual goals. Sometimes we graze later in development, as you've seen in the video, for leaf and sucker removal. And if we some growers having higher trellis system and specific breeds, shorter breeds can do year-long integration. So we surveyed various vineyards that have had sheep grazing in vineyards for more than 5 years and that were on similar soil texture, and kind of look at various soil health outcomes. We coupled that with a long-term treatment, a long-term trial where we had till and no till and compost, no compost treatment for 22 years, and we grazed on top to try to tease out some of the impacts. And that's a work that Cassie Brewer, PhD student in my lab, led. So what happens? So you have sheep. It will deposit urine and trample, and that will affect the amount and quality of nutrient inputs. It will shift the root to shoot ratio and the vegetation quality. So usually we go from a high carbon to nitrogen ratio to a lower carbon to nitrogen ratio. That will impact your microbial diversity. It will impact biodiversity, root architecture, and root quality and exudates, but also the amount of grasses you get and the amount of residue return, because by grazing you often trigger higher growth of grasses. So I'm making that's 5 years of research right there, summarized in 2 seconds. And so what do we see in terms of soil health? Well, grazing for significantly increase microbial biomass, so the amount of microbes you have in your soil, and their activity. The microbial biomass increased by 85% in the topsoil, and especially in the lower depths of the soil, a very dramatic increase in the amount of microbes. We do not see shift in soil structure. That's something that we often hear about, but the sheep are going to compact my soil. It will reduce my aggregation. That's not something that we see. However, it's very dependent on the grazing practice. So you need to have a good shepherd in the mix as well. So we see increase in microbial biomass, we see increase in microbial activity, about 40% more respiration. So there's a lot of microbes, they're very active, it just jazzed up your system. Big time. I've never seen such number with cover crop or no-till or compost. You just get to another level of soil health here. We see in terms of microbial community, they're more diverse. They're more fungal dominated. So more fungus, less bacteria. We see more mycorrhizae and more fungi that are involved in decomposition. So saprophytes and actinomycetes. So more living soil, basically. Fungus are really good in the soil. They build up resilience. They're the one that helps your soil function when you have a drought, for instance. Second, grazing significantly increased soil carbon and carbon storage, and especially in more persistent pools. So if we're talking about sequestering carbon on the long term, sheep grazing and grazing animals in general can be very beneficial. So we see increase of soil organic carbon about 5 tons per hectare across various depths. And in particular, so when the microbe die, that's what we call the micromass, the carbon coming out of those dead microbes and what stays in your soil in the long term. So if we talk about carbon sequestration, it's mostly microbial biomass. And we see a huge increase in persistent, which is behind this little window here, in persistent carbon, especially in the 15 to 45 centimeter depths of the soil. So beneficial for microbial community, beneficial for soil carbon, you get this soil ecosystem going, and you get this more persistent long-term carbon sequestration in your soil. Finally, grazing significantly increased carbon and nitrogen cycling. We see an increase in mineralization. We see an increase in enzymes. So those are indicators of various functions that the microbes provide. So beta-glucosidase is the breakdown of carbon. Urease is the nitrogen transformation, and the aminopeptidase as well. So I'm just showing you what moves there's in the soils and the type of indicators. Eventually, all this leads to increases in phosphorus and nitrogen availability, and that's something we need to wrestle with in thinking about nitrogen budgeting and fertilization management. But in the topsoil, we see an increase by 31% of labile of total nitrogen, and increase in nitrate and ammonium in inorganic form. Also, an increase in soil phosphorus. So, some interesting shifts in nitrogen dynamics that we need to better integrate into management as well. There's some potential trade-offs. These practices can create hotspots for nitrogen, so potentially increasing the leaching potential in some places where urine has been deposited, and it brings heterogeneity. So you're going to have a pool of manure here. The soil is going to look very different from the soil next to it. We also see increase in salinity, which is a concern for California growers. However, we're still well below the threshold at which it will be worrisome for a crop. Grazing intensity really matters. Here, it's new projects we're getting going with Tony, a new PhD student in my lab. Here you can see soil health scores, organic carbon, soil invertebrate, various soil property here. And you see whether here is the performance on a normalized space of a non-grazed vineyard. And here you see where we have dormant season grazing. And when you start extending the season of grazing all year long, you see very different outcomes, sometimes beneficial, sometimes some trade-offs. So grazing intensity and duration actually matters into modifying some of those outcomes for soil health. And so in terms of systems, what can be happening? Our growing report really benefits for weed control, helping control cover crops, etc. We've kind of tried to monetize this. It leads to about two fewer mows annually, 1.5 fewer herbicide application. So we're doing actually the cost benefit right now from a dollar perspective. Now, it was niche. It's moving to mainstream in some part of California. Growers are concerned about how do you manage the animal. That seems very complicated. The lack of advising and training, worrying about damaging irrigation lines, and risk of soil compaction. Now, a lot of growers see the advantage in limiting labor, which is a very big problem right now in California, and also fire prevention. So when you get your sheep in there, you also graze around your vineyard, and half of Napa already burned a couple of years ago. So that's something that is very high on our list. It's improving benefits for healthy soil, and we have huge policy incentives right now in California into getting our soil healthier. And there's a real marketing aspect that some of our growers have been embracing, especially for large wineries. We see sheep on the label. We see the wine and cheese kind of narrative. And you go at the winery, you have your wine, you see the sheep out there. It's bucolic. It's working for some of our larger wineries. And then we're having some interesting development. I mean, this research, believe it or not, is funded by the wool industry. That's Patagonia, that's North Face. They're buying the wools from the sheep. We're giving them the carbon sequestration potential, and they're building a line of climate beneficial apparels to value, and the money is trickling back down to growers for implementation of carbon sequestration practices. So we have some interesting new things happening with a merger of the textile industry and the wine industry, and some interest coming from places that I was not really thinking about. And so in conclusion, really soil health is interesting because here you see the soil component of terroir, and here you see soil health indicators. There's definitely an overlap. So when you're impacting soil health, whichever practice you're thinking about, you're also impacting the terroir. You're also impacting the flavor of your wines. And strategically applying sheep grazing in addition to cover crop, compost, and no tillage has actually a significant potential to improve soil health, but also our environmental stewardship and resource management. The outcomes are likely influenced by grazing intensity and what's the starting state of your soils. It's knowledge intensive, and we're trying to build a platform for growers to learn from each other. And we're building a network of contractors and producers, sheep contractors and producers, so that they can better integrate within the landscape, and we're working on filling the knowledge gap when it comes to practical trainings and workshop about this practice, thinking about redesigning vineyards to make it work. Right now we're tweaking systems, but there's a real potential to redesign our vineyards, and doing a complete cost benefit analysis for growers to be able to budget this in a more thorough way. With that, I thank my collaborator, and thank people online and here for your attention. And I'll be happy to answer a question now or later. I'll leave it back to you. Thank you.
I think we'll go ahead and hold questions just for now and have Justine speak, and kind of have a big old Q&A afterwards for both of them. So our next speaker is going to be a familiar face to most of you. Justine Van Heuvel is a professor in the horticulture section of SIPS, the School of Integrated Plant Sciences, Integrated Plant Science. I know, I get corrected. And has been working very closely with my program and Jen Russo's program out in Lake Erie, and all of us across the state. And so Justine's program has been focused a lot on various aspects of soil health, from undervine cover crops to sheep grazing to mycorrhizal impacts of mycorrhizal fungi on root systems. And so I asked Justine to kind of follow up and talk, which is kind of bigger picture, broader picture, with some of the specific things that she's been seeing in some of her research here in New York. So Justine.
Thank you.
Pointed that way.
Pointed that way. Okay. I have a bit of a concern here as someone who dabbles in soil health to speak. Someone who's an expert in soil health is concerning. Sorry, this looked fine on my computer. I don't know if something's going wrong here.
Looks okay on the screen here.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about 3 different practices today and how we can potentially use them in New York to improve soil health. One is sheep grazing, which I think I talked about at Bev maybe last year, the year before. Since 2020, it's all been a blur. I'm sorry. But some of you have seen our data on that. And I wanted to mention that Justine Jackson, who's now with the New York Wine and Grape Foundation as their sustainability coordinator, was the one who had worked on this with me. And I'm going to talk about mycorrhizal inoculation and then undervine cover crops as well. So starting out with mycorrhiza. So these are groups of fungi that basically colonize a root system of many, many plants around the world. More than half of the plants form these mycorrhizal associations, but basically the fungi colonizes the root system. And I have 2 mics. Very nice. Thank you. So they colonize the root system, and what they get from the vine is carbon, right? And what they help the vine with is acquiring water and nutrients. So it's a really good relationship. A classic relationship who's evolved about 400 to 500 million years ago. And luckily for us, these mycorrhizae do colonize grapevine roots. So how does this work? The vine basically, sometimes they think it's sending out distress signals through root exudates. I know flavonoids have been implicated and some other compounds as well. And basically these fungi exist and the spores are sitting in the soil, and then they are triggered somehow, and then they germinate and they put out these filaments, or what we call hyphae. So it's basically these long strands that actually then colonize the cortical cells of the roots. So that's happening right here. So this is the spore that's germinating, produces the hyphae, colonizes the root system, and then forms what are called arbuscules. And these arbuscules are where there is nutrient exchange between the fungus and the plant. And so what happens then is that we've got these hyphae that are in the roots, basically moving nutrients around, and we get hyphae that form outside of the roots, and they essentially act as a root system for the plant. They are these long filaments. They access water, they access nutrients, and they explore soil volume that hasn't been explored by the roots. So these are really amazing things. So this is an image from one of our studies at Sawmill Creek, just to show you a bit of the what these look like. So this is a root of Pinot Noir. These are the arbuscules where we've got nutrient exchange happening between the fungus and the plant. And these are hyphal coils, so those filaments we talked about. You can see a hyphae coming through here, and these are the vesicles where the plant is storing those nutrients so that they can be used at a later date. So there's so many benefits of mycorrhizal fungi, but what I'm going to focus my comments are the box over there, soil structure and soil organic carbon. And this is an area where my group is starting to collect some data. I think many of you host a research study that we're working on, where we're basically putting together a large multivariate model to predict root colonization. And we're also looking at soil health as a function of that as well. So many of you host some of my grad students that have been coming in and collecting data on that. Again, this looks a little different on my screen at home, but whatever. We're going to roll with it. Okay. So there's basically 3 ways that these fungi can impact soil health. Okay. The first is through plant physiology. So an example of that, and these are some different examples, and these are the papers that they come from,
is that we've shown in our studies that when we inoculate with some of these fungi, just commercial products, we actually see a change in root morphology. We see an increase in the root length. We see a decrease in the root diameter. And that gives us an increase in specific root length, which essentially is used as a proxy for how much soil is my vine exploring, right? So even apart from these hyphae that act as roots, what actually happens is that we see a change in the roots, right? And so the roots then are able to, on their own, explore more soil volume, even without the hyphae. And so then for that reason, then as they die, we're seeing changes in soil health there. The second way these mycorrhizae impact soil health is through soil ecological interactions. So rhizobium are basically nitrogen-producing bacteria. They play an important role for legumes like soybeans, for example. And then there's also these phosphate solubilizing bacteria. And what they do is like they're known, they soluble, that is a hard word to say. They make phosphate more available to the vine. And so basically the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, so we call those AMF, and the rhizobium, and then these phosphate bacteria all work together and impact the ecology of the soil. And we see an increase in soil organic carbon as a function of that. And then the last one that I wanted to focus on is sort of the easiest way to think about how these impact soil health is through soil structure. And it's through a compound called glomalin, or glomalin, sorry. And again, this is not a very good projector, so I'm sorry. So what we have here are a bunch of soil particles, right? We've got sand, clay, and silt. And what happens is that we get these hyphae, right? So these are those filaments that come from the germinating spores. So the black circles here are spores. The hyphae grow from them. And so not only do those hyphae sort of wrap around soil particles and help bring them together, but they release this compound called glomalin, which essentially acts as a glue and helps glue these soil particles together. So what we end up having is, or I shouldn't say we, because I don't have data from New York for this yet. But what has ended up happening in other soils, and that's reported in the academic literature, is that we have an increase in aggregate stability of the soil and aggregate size. So basically the soil is able to prevent itself from eroding a little bit better because it's got this glue of the glomalin and of the hyphae that are holding it all together. So we only have 1 year of data so far on soil health in mycorrhizae, so I'm not going to present that at this point, but it's something that we're working on. The literature, really, when we look at it from a range of crops, is really pretty clear on what the benefits of mycorrhizae are. And the nice thing is that we know that we can inoculate here in the Finger Lakes, at least, and we can get greater root length colonization. So we've worked with a number of commercial products. If you look, there's a paper or an article in Appalachian Cornell where we wrote all this up, and a lot of these products actually work. We see increased root colonization in that we see more hyphae, we see more vesicles, and we see more arbuscules when we do it. Now, our efforts have focused here in Finger Lakes, and of course, the results that you get are going to be very dependent on soil type and probably the microbial population in your soil as well. So moving on, this was a video that didn't carry over, which is too bad because it's pretty cute with the sheep grazing. So we have been working on, as many of you know, in-season grazing for a couple of reasons. One is we just have so much to graze, right? Is if we can reduce mowing, if we can reduce or eliminate suckering, for example, can actually save us a lot of time and a lot of effort.
So we started grazing and have been focusing our in-season grazing on high-trained hybrid vineyards. We have done a little bit of work with the sheep grazing to do leaf removal in VSP. That works as long as you pull a bird net over the leaves that are above the fruit zone so that they don't eat all of your leaves. We were unable to get the very short statured sheep. These are ones that I rent from Agrivoltaic Solutions, which rents sheep for solar farms. And so an interesting point here is that when Amelie and I were discussing this yesterday, and she said, oh, we don't pay the shepherd to come to the vineyard, right? You know, we've got the forage. To my knowledge, or at least in my experience, it doesn't work that way up here. I did have to pay a shepherd to come and bring the sheep and then come and pick them up when we were done with them as well. So it's going to be a very different economic model. So we tried this for 3 years, but only have 2 years of replicated data on soil health. At this point, we haven't seen an impact, but we wouldn't expect to see an impact of the grazing so early in the study, right? So I think in our conversations, because I called Amelie years ago when I was just getting into this, and she said, plan on 5 years. So does it improve soil health here in the Finger Lakes? I can't say that. Does it look like it probably has a really good opportunity to? I would say absolutely. The other benefit of using sheep in the Finger Lakes is that we can easily maintain underlying vegetation because the sheep are going to graze it, right? And this is something, and I know almost everyone in this room from New York has heard me say this, we have to get rid of bare soil in vineyards unless we really need it. And honestly, when I travel around at least the Finger Lakes, there are only a few sites that can't put up with at least minimal competition from a cover crop. And we've talked about buckwheat in the past, right? I worked with buckwheat for years and years. It establishes a really nice stand, outcompetes weeds, does not reduce vine size, right? So we need to start getting rid of our bare soil undervines. We're really good about between rows. Undervines, we need to do more. And so when we graze with the sheep in the vineyard, they take care of all of that. They ate everything except for thistle. So this is something we're currently looking for some funding to hopefully continue with the sheep grazing study so that we can get a good idea about how this could actually work in New York and particularly the impacts on soil health. But for undervine cover crops, we have a lot of great data, right? My group has probably been working on this for 12 years or so now. So we know when we have bare soil, we get a lot of soil breakdown, particularly from the precipitation, the heavy precipitation that we get in this region. And when you look at the statistics, it's incredible. And it's something like in the last 20 years, it's how often do you get these intense rain events, which is defined in a certain way, and it's like 5 centimeters over the course of a few hours. And that has increased 71% or something like that, right? We get much more intense rain events than we used to. And so with those intense rain events, we have to be really concerned about soil breakdown where we have bare soil. And so when we have the soil breakdown over there on the right, we get runoff of soil and nutrients, particularly when we're on slopes, which is many of our vineyards. We get leaching of nitrogen and leaching of carbon. If we have an undervine cover crop, when the rain hits, it's much less of a physical force on the soil, right? So we don't have that significant disruption. Plus, we have the roots of the undervine cover crop there to hold the soil in place as opposed to just allowing it to run. So there's really a lot of benefits. And what we see when we have an undervine cover crop is we've used, the Rhizotron cameras and imaged roots considerably deeper in the soil. And we get these significant improvements in soil health. So I'll show you some of our, what is now slightly older data from that. So here's what it looks like, and you can hopefully see the differences in vine size here. On the left-hand side, we have chicory. We use it as an annual, but it actually does keep coming back for a few years, but it loses its dwarf characteristics after the first year. And on the right, we have buckwheat. And with buckwheat, we do not see a decrease in vine size. So for anyone who has bare soil that they're concerned about, but they don't want to decrease vine size, buckwheat is definitely worth trying. We've had really good luck with it. I will tell you it is a little expensive in some years. Chicory works great for really pulling back vine size. And our idea with undervine cover crops is it's unlikely you're going to find one that works every year, right? I think every year when you're doing your pruning, you're going to need to reflect on what's the vine size? Do I want to maintain this vine size? Do I want to pull back on it? Do I want to increase it? And then make some undervine cover crop decisions for the coming year. So this is some data from a study. We had undervine cover crops in the Cabernet Franc vineyard for 5 years. We didn't collect data the first year, and then we collected for the next 4. So this is an average of the 4 years of data. This is for soil respiration. So soil respiration is essentially a proxy for the amount of living material in your soil. And so here are the different treatments. The gray bar is cultivation. The red bar is glyphosate. The blue is what we call natural vegetation. Hence, we just let the weeds grow. What we get is what we get. And then the yellow is white clover. And you can see we've got a real boost in soil respiration in our natural vegetation there because there was a lot of diversity in those plots. So we'd been using a pre-emergent herbicide on that site previously. The first year we get some smartweed and a couple other things. And by the time we're at the end of this study, we've got 40 different species growing at least under the vine in these plots on the east side of Cayuga. So that diversity makes a real difference in terms of the soil. And this is soil organic matter. Again, from the same study, averaged over 4 years. And you can see cultivation is the lowest at about 2.7%. White clover is the highest, but not statistically different from from natural vegetation and glyphosate. And that's up to about 3.4%. And so remember, a certain portion of organic matter is soil organic carbon. I can't remember the number off the top of my head. How much organic matter is soil organic carbon? 57%. Okay, so this is an increase in soil organic carbon just from having undervine cover crops. So this is from a different study. So this had a number of treatments. The first is glyphosate, and then we've got our natural vegetation, tillage radish, chicory, fescue, and alfalfa. And then across the top here, we've got aggregate stability, organic matter, microbial respiration, and mineralizability. And so this is 2015 was year 2 of the study, 2016 was year 3 of the study. And the stars indicate that treatment is significantly different than the glyphosate plots, right? And so you can see, for example, alfalfa in both years had statistically more greater aggregate stability, which is a very good thing, compared to glyphosate. And if we look at organic matter, it really depended on the year, right? In 2016, most of the treatments had significantly greater organic matter than the glyphosate. So in terms of cover crops, the data is kind of all over the place here, right? In terms of what's going to be the best. But what does stand out is that glyphosate is always the worst, right? It's the worst for aggregate stability, for organic matter, for microbial respiration, and for mineralizability. What did we also look at? Porosity of the soil. Glyphosate was the worst. I'm trying to think. We had a couple of other measures that I didn't put in here. Oh, we had bulk density of the soil. Glyphosate and cultivation were the worst there as well. So the data is really clear. And, some of you have hosted these studies for us, and we've been working on them for years. we need to have a cover crop right under the vines in our vineyards to really promote soil health. On the left here, we have what's called a picoet. And so the way you read a picoet is basically, if the dots are on top of each other, they're pretty much the same. And if they're separating by more space, then they're different. So this was a 3-year study where we had treatments of cultivation, glyphosate, and the natural vegetation, right, which is just our weed combo. And we collected at bloom and we collected at harvest, and then these are 3 different years. So the first year, 2014, all our green dots are pretty much up there. So no real significant difference in the fungal component of the soil. And I'm sorry, back this up. This is for fungi in the soil. 2015, we start to see a drift in 2016 where the natural vegetation treatments, that soil is really different in terms of the microbial composition than our cultivation and our glyphosate, which are pretty much the same. And if we go over to the Venn diagram over on the right-hand side, so those are numbers of OTUs. OTUs are operational taxonomical units, which essentially for microbial work is a proxy for either genus or species. In this case, we'll go with genus. And it's just basically you're looking at these bits of DNA and then sorting them into groups if they're similar. And so if we look at unique OTUs, and the colors here are the same, we can see our 2 Bayer treatments are about the same, 185, 186, but our natural vegetation treatment has 201 OTUs. So it's got some diversity there that isn't in the other treatments. It's got basically more of these OTUs, which we're going to call a proxy for genus in this. So it doesn't take long. It's really only in the second year that we start to see this positive impact on soil health just by allowing some weeds to grow. So if you're interested, so you can just basically allow your weeds to grow. There are undervine mowers that you can get. A few people have them around the Finger Lakes now. I think Soil and Water has one that has 2 that are available sometimes for use. And if you want to plant a specific cover crop, which is the best way to make sure that vine size isn't too negatively impacted, right? Because natural vegetation, you don't know what you're going to get. It's going to differ block by block. Some of those weed species may be more competitive, some not. So I think it works. I actually use natural vegetation at our Cornell vineyards for all of our blocks, unless they're new, because we have big vines and it's just easier. We can just mow it and we don't have to plant it. If you want to plant something, Hans has designed a cedar and is happy to loan it out or send you plans for making your own.
As soon as I draw them.
As soon as you draw them. And before I answer questions, changing topics just a little bit. Okay, this summer I am hosting the largest meeting of viticulturists internationally that happens, and it's called GIESCO. It started as a French organization and then expanded nationally and internationally. And it's usually about 180 to 200 viticulturists from all around the world. And on Thursday, July 20th, we're having what they call the Professional Day, which is where viticulturists from all around the world are speaking specifically to industry. So if you want to join, it will be quite interesting. We've got some really great speakers, remote sensing for disease and spray residue, Katie Gold. Michaela Centenari from Penn State is going to be talking about the threat of the spotted lanternfly. She's got like 4 or 5 years of data now on the long-term feeding impacts. I will tell you, it's shocking. Definitely worth seeing, and some information on new technologies for vineyards as well. We've got an international list of speakers, and you can join in person or via Zoom, and there's more information on the website. It's really a pretty unique opportunity to hear from people from around the world. And with that, I think we'd be happy to take questions.
Justine, questions, and thanks for typing to Q&A and try to get to the process as well. Let's start with this question first. It's a slightly question, but it's a quick one. So the first one is, what's the effect of colonization if you're using synthetic fertilizers? The second one, networks in arid soils versus soils where you've got quite a lot of growing season rainfall. And the third one is the evidence for colonizing networks within vineyards, because we've heard about all the stories about the old growth fells in BC, where you get but there's mostly active mycorrhizal versus arbuscular mycorrhizal networks. And could it be in vineyards, you might have some sort of colonizing network connecting vines together, or connecting vines with other things growing in the vineyard.
So are you here to test my memory to make sure I can get through the three? Okay. So number one, the question was about synthetic fertilizers, and we don't know the answer to that. I don't think I know the answer to that. I don't think anyone knows the answer to that question at this point, specific for vineyards. Number two was about arid soils. That's you.
So arid soils have less organic carbon. There's less food for those microbes. We actually see that when we inoculate, we're having a hard time to keep those mycorrhizae in there. So that's something. What we see with fertilization, what research has shown is not necessarily, I think I agree with you, Justine, that we don't really know the direct impact of fertilization on mycorrhizae, but we know that the benefits you might get from your mycorrhizae will be decreased just because they kick in. If you have a plentiful system, those microbes might not be as beneficial as when you're starting to lower inputs. So the amount of inputs shifts the amount of benefits you might get to the vine, but we don't really know how it impacts the mycorrhizae themselves. And the last one was
about networks. And that's a really good question. We don't know the answer for vineyards. It would be fascinating to find out, right? And my guess is that some of these older vineyards, particularly in cooler climate regions, there would be a chance that we have networks. Certainly AMF. So grapevines form relationships with a type of AMF called endomycorrhizae, and certainly other plants in the vineyard are going to be potentially using that too. So I think there's the potential for networks, but I do not know of any work in vineyards that has been done on that.
So as you build out this data set, are there any correlations being done between mycorrhizal networks and soil health generally and fruit composition?
So it's like a little bit better. The question is about the connection between
Yeah. So yes, we're looking at it, but it's going to take a lot of data to come up with that, right? I mean, we have started looking at it in, replicated trials where we've inoculated, and you can get a bit of an idea there. But then in this sort of multivariate model that we're putting together, we have a whole lot of sites inoculated, not inoculated. And it's going to take us a while to answer that because it's not going to be easy. Nothing with fruit composition is ever easy, right? Yeah. Is trying to figure out what those impacts are.
Justine, just great work with the shape and everything. It's good to see that finally, moving forward and some really good answers to the questions we've had. But one thing, have we looked at the idea of maybe other animals rather than sheep? as you know, you and I've talked before, it just doesn't really work sometimes with microsystems in this late season, trying to get them in for vineyard sanitation and keep them in all winter. We just don't have the food source for them. So recently I switched to chickens as a way to do that. And if you explore chickens or animals, and also to plant the tillage radish that you were talking about in that one study, if that was early season or late, like in August or.
So tillage.
Sorry, Justine,
Okay, yeah.
so the question was looking at sheep and also tillage radish cover crop.
So other animals, no, we have not. I know some other growers are exploring some opportunities as well. We would love to, if anyone's introducing some other animals, I'm happy to come and have a look and collect some data. Or if you know funding opportunities where we can do something collaboratively. Find a great foundation. That's a great one too. Your second question is about when did you plant tillage radish? And it's funny, so because in the experiment where I showed that one, we were clearly having an impact of planting date that we didn't pursue experimentally, but I Googled because one year we pulled them out and they were bigger than my arm in many cases, right? And then the next year they were kind of small. And what I read was it's whether you plant them before or after the solstice and whether that has an impact. So I don't know if anyone else here might be able to comment on planting of tillage radish, but yeah, we had huge variations in the size. Spring, sorry, spring.
Just like, I'm gonna do this. I would have done buckwheat in the spring and then terminated that with the cultivator, and then at that same time put the tillage radish in then. Because then it will winter kill. Otherwise, I worry about it, under the vines, setting seed and everything like that.
Right. Did you get much growth before it winter killed?
I got enough of a growth, and it actually created a carpet that smothered out the weeds for the winter. So I didn't have those like winter annuals or the biennials.
Okay, good. Yeah, we haven't tried a late planting. We've only done sort of a May-June planting.
So I will take this opportunity to move on to our next session in section. That's it's a lot of experience using tillage radish. It's kind of crop mix, and so I know that's one of the things that will.
For the most part, we plant in late July, and then only in the center of the row. We've tried planting some under the row by just broadcasting, but we're not getting good seed to soil contact. And that was a question I was going to ask you. How you were doing that? I have planted them in our cedar every other row and the no-till cedar, and the radish got so big it choked the ryegrass out in the other row.
Oh wow!
And just lately I've tried planting some in June, and a lot of them will just bolt and go to seed, and some of them put on a normal radish like they do in the fall. But when they die in the summertime, they don't smell quite as bad as they do in the fall.
So last was just dry, basically, is those tillage radish. That's one question we have from Amelie. It's sheep acres. Just directed to you.
Yeah, so we had tiny little plots basically because we were trying to do a replicated study in a not very big block. So on a per acre basis, it probably came out to about 25 per acre. Is that about what you're using as well?
20 and 30.
Okay. Yes. But it really depends how much forage you have for them, right? Is we were kind of backing off on shoot density because we had 3 plots for them to go into, and then I didn't want to have to put them somewhere else for a 4th plot. I wanted to be able to rotate them through those 3. I will say I learned a valuable lesson is in one of Justine's plots. We only had, it was really small, so we had like 4 sheep, and they were always really nervous. And then one of them amazingly jumped out of the trailer and then ran through the snow fence and then ran along the fence at Cornell Orchards and exited out, never to be seen again. And it is very difficult to lose an animal at Cornell. You have to do a lot of paperwork when that happens. So my advice for anyone trying that is try a larger flock, even if it means for a shorter period of time, because this group was always nervous because there were only a few individuals in it, and a larger flock just works a lot easier from what I've seen.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So they're not impacting, growth through exogenous nitrogen. Tends to run between high 2% to 0.5%. So they increase soil organic matter, and end up with huge vines that we have to hedge the hell out of. So that's a.
So I'll start and then we'll have Amelie answer this as well. So my thought about when do we have enough soil health, it's probably when we have no offsite impacts of our vineyards. And I look forward to seeing a vineyard that has no offsite impacts, right? I think we need to really think big picture about something like that. In terms of organic matter, I mean, I think we need to remember, and I know my opinion here is not a popular one, that we are still sort of shoehorning our vineyard practices into these European definitions where we need VSP and we want to have close vineyard spacing, and that doesn't really work on high organic matter soils, right? So we can get around that and just give, even if we were to increase organic matter, I think the benefits would be such that we should work around it and just increase our vine spacing, or choose a training system that is not VSP, since it was never intended for really high organic matter soils, and work around it that way. And Amelie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm wrestling with your question. Maximizing health. So, it's a beautiful metaphor. It's hard to measure. We use a bunch of indicators. It's context dependent. It will depend of your soils, etc. So, I like your approach of thinking of the outcome and the upside impacts. In California, soil organic matter is really hard to accumulate. It's my island. You can, I've had some sites where we've been putting compost for years and we haven't made a dent in soil organic matter. So it's realizing that it is very context dependent. That being said, we see improvements in soil health without increases in soil carbon. Especially when it comes down to infiltration, etc., having this living roots in the system, even if we don't have improvement in soil carbon, we see shifts in aggregates, we see shifts in infiltration. So it's not a one size fits all for sure.
Right. And I think I would just wrap up to say that I don't think we should be scared of improving soil health, right? Yeah. We're a smart industry and we can find ways to start to work around any challenges that come up with that.
Last question, Paul.
So the issue with sheep in our climate being the fact that we all have to deal with them.
Yeah.
So organic copper is a must for downy mildew control. What experience, especially do you have with copper? What concern do you have with copper with sheep after the fact, and maybe even during? Because you did mention that some people trying to be sheep during the growing season. Thanks.
Can you repeat the question? That seems to be the only mic that's working.
So the question is about potential copper toxicity and interaction with the sheep. We haven't done that research. That's a recurring question we have in our landscape. The French have been doing some research about it. and a colleague at INRA show that it can impact sheep health, and so you have to be very mindful about it. What we see though is that some potential decrease in the pressure with grazing, but I don't have good data quite yet, but it helps just by controlling vegetation.
I think we're going to cut it off there for today. Thank you, Amelie and Justine, for speaking. Very much appreciate it.